In today's video, we're going to take some time and talk about weed. More specifically, I want to discuss why weed was such a problem for me. If you're new to the channel, my name's Dr. Frank. I'm the founder of AddictionMindset recovery coaching programs, which are dedicated to helping people quit nicotine, THC, energy drinks, and adult media content, substances I once struggled with. If you need help quitting smoking weed, be sure to check out the video description or the pinned comment for a free 7-step guide on quitting. Why was weed a problem? Why was this the case? Well, there's actually several reasons why. Reason number one, it seems harmless and it's socially accepted. So when I first started smoking weed, the substance seemed harmless. In fact, if anything, recreationally, it was quite enjoyable. And I could compare this almost to alcohol. Alcohol, when most people start drinking at a younger age, they don't really feel the bad effects. They don't feel the hangover. They don't feel the headache. They don't feel the nausea if you drink too much. And weed is kind of the same thing. When you first start smoking weed, it's fun and it appears to be completely harmless, especially if you begin at a younger age where a lot of your peers are, presumably smoking weed with you. Socially, it's a pretty accepted thing nowadays. I don't really understand why online there's so many people in the 420 community saying, oh my God, weed isn't accepted socially. We need more acceptance of weed. I don't know where that exists. I'm in a state where weed is not, well, actually now I think it is legal recreationally here in New York, but it's pretty socially accepted. It's a pretty accepted thing. It's right up there with alcohol, I would say. So between it seeming like a harmless drug and being socially accepted, these are things that I think actually make it a lot more dangerous. And I'm going to explain why that is. When I got heavy into my weed addiction, there was a lot of wasted time. Doing what? What was I doing with this time? Well, to be honest, when I would get high, I would dive into other behaviors. For me, this tended to be browsing social media content for hours aimlessly, watching the news or watching Netflix for hours aimlessly, or watching adult media content and consuming not so good stuff in the evening hours of my day. Now, that equates to a lot of wasted time. And that's really, really bad because time is the one thing in life that we cannot get back. I can get back money, I can get friendships, I can get, all those things. Even to an extent, health. You can reclaim your health, you can heal. Time is one thing, though, that once it's gone for good. And I just think back to all the hours that I sat in my room stoned, especially between the ages of 25 to 29, where my career was really starting to begin. And I just think of all the wasted time. And when I ask myself, what was I doing? The answer is really nothing productive. In fact, a lot of times when I was smoking weed, I was partaking in other addictive but negative behaviors, right? Binge watching Netflix for hours on end is not a good behavior trait. That's not a good characteristic. Maybe for you, it's playing video games for hours on end. That's not a good behavior trait to have. So not only was I wasting my time, but I was actually putting my time into other problematic behaviors, especially when we talk about cannabis addiction and adult media content addiction going hand in hand, which is often something that we deal with at our offices. These are two things that go hand in hand. So you waste time. This is probably one of the most harmful things about weed addiction, the wasted time, because time is the one thing you will never get back in life. Weed, when we develop an addiction to it, it decreases our dopamine levels. Anytime we have an addiction, our brain enters a state of a dopamine deficit. Now, dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's responsible for motivation and drive and ambition and the will to get out there and go do something. Dopamine is responsible for that. So when we get stuck in the cycle of addiction, especially when it comes to cannabis, we wind up in a state of dopamine deficit And in turn, we have decreased drive, decreased motivation. And this is horrible. Dopamine is often referred to the neurotransmitter that put humans on the top of the food chain. It's because of dopamine we want to get out there and get after it. So anything that puts our dopamine at risk, and you could say the same for porn, social media, video games, these things are not harmless things, and they stand to cause a lot of harm in our life, because if I'm not feeling motivated, if I'm not feeling driven, if I'm not feeling like I want to accomplish something, that's not good. That's going to lead to more anxiety and more depression in the bigger picture of my life, especially if I'm sitting there stoned knowing that I could be doing better. So decreased dopamine, decreased drive, decreased motivation. And this is a mechanism for any addictive substance, for any drug. This same mechanism occurs. So big problem right there. Long-term use of marijuana right now, according to Stanford physician Dr. Anna Lembke, right, who's very well respected in the addiction community, makes it very clear that we do not have long-term studies on the use of cannabis for mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, PTSD. Short-term, marijuana looks promising. Long-term, it's not looking so good. And that to me makes a lot of sense. I don't need to wait for the federal research to come out to tell me that, because I know something. When you develop an addiction and you're putting your time and your money and your effort and your drive into a drug, you're missing out on a lot of other things that life has to offer, on all your goals, all the things that you want to go after. So of course, long term, the consequences of addiction are going to make us more depressed and more anxious. And this is really screwed up, because right now, between the social acceptance and all the videos you see online saying, oh my God, weed is so good for depression, it's so good for anxiety. Short term, maybe, but long term, THC specifically does not look too promising. Now, I don't know about some of the other endocannabinoids. CBD, I do think actually probably looks very promising when it comes to these things. But obviously I'm talking about THC addiction in reference to this video, okay? So long term, it's not looking good. And that's what makes weed such a sneaky addiction. It starts off good, but long term it ends up bad for so many people. The saddest part is a lot of people don't realize that until they're in their 40s, in their 60s. That's why I'm so dedicated to making videos for you guys to hopefully catch you either in your teens or somewhere around the age of 30, right when that career is starting to take off. Health issues. Cannabis has health issues. We talk about it all the time being so good for health, and it is. There are aspects of CBD and other endocannabinoids that I think are very promising, but when we're talking about THC addiction, right, here I was thinking it was helping me with my stomach health, helping me with my workout recovery. I developed Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome. I couldn't work out for almost 2 years, 2 years after quitting smoking weed because of the myalgia and my pain perception being so far off. It completely stripped me of my ability to lift weights for a long, long time. Mental health was in the gutter long term. And again, is that the weed and the impact that weed is having on my endocannabinoid system long term? Or was that the consequences of addiction to a drug that I was suffering from? What about psychosis? What about manic behavior? I think I just saw an article recently linking cannabis use officially to, it was either to Parkinson's or schizophrenia, presumably schizophrenia. We'll do another video on that soon. But long-term health issues, there's going to be complications. Anytime you're lighting something and smoking it, you're creating a carcinogenic type reaction. Anytime you're burning something, you're creating an oxidative reaction, which comes with cancer risk. There's significant tar production when we're smoking blunts, especially if you're mixing it with tobacco. So for people to go around pretending like there's no health consequences, something that I was once under the impression of, is just totally false information. and it's dangerous information, right? I suffered from all these things. When I was done with my journey with weed, I had psychosis, I had manic behavior, and I had cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And it took a long time for me to recover from those things. So it doesn't come without health issues. And worst of all, I think one of the most harmful side effects of cannabis is it makes you okay with not being okay. And this kind of shadows another quote that I usually say: weed doesn't cure the boredom, it makes you content with being bored. And that's really dangerous in my opinion, because when we're not feeling okay, and I'm not talking about cancer, I'm not talking about medical things, okay? I'm talking about when you're at home, stoned, playing video games, watching porn, knowing that there's more to your life, and suddenly you are content with that situation. That's not okay. The anxiety that you're feeling, the depression you're feeling, that's meant to be a fire underneath your butt to drive change. And weed, when it strips us of the dopamine, when it strips us of the motivation, when it strips us from the ability to drive change, that's not okay. That's not a good situation to be in. And this is what I'm saying. Weed makes us okay with not being okay. And that's never okay. That's never a good thing. We should never be content with a boring life that isn't satisfying to us. Any addiction to any drug creates this facade. And I think this is one of the most harmful things that I experienced when it came to weed addiction. And that's saying a lot from a guy who suffered psychosis, manic behavior, CHS, financial struggles, relationship struggles. This was the worst side effect that I experienced of smoking weed. If this video connects with you guys, be sure to check out the pinned comment to pick up that free resource, or feel free to look into our paid recovery coaching programs. I promise it's worth every cent, and if you don't want to do that, follow me into the next video where I talk a little bit more about cannabis and depression. I'll see you guys in one of those spots.